Good evening and welcome to tonight's episode of Embracing the Moment. I'm your host, Pastor Joe Ercoli here at Genesis Church, and this is our third episode this month. We're focusing on Black History Month and looking at different experiences, different backgrounds with the guests that we've had on, all for the purpose of really seeking that racial reconciliation, building bridges in our community, and hopefully in humility, seeing how God might be wanting to move and change and stir in our hearts. So tonight, I'm really excited to have with me Julie Mataforo. She is the clinical coordinator and professional counselor at Catalasso Family Health Center. So welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So as Pastor Bob and I were kind of framing up these episodes for this month, you were one person that came to mind, and I would love to hear kind of about your experience and how you came to the United States, because to give it away, you're not actually from here.
No, I'm not from here, and it can be easily given away. My accent gives it away all the time. I used to get that question multiple times a day at work over the years.
Okay.
So where's your accent from? Well, I am originally from Nigeria. I've been here since 1996, okay. October 96. And just like any other immigrant, people don't usually leave their hometown that they are used to, familiar with, culture that they are used to, and move to a whole different nation for no reason. Usually...
It's a small transition.
Yeah. Usually it's for better opportunities, and for better life, and for majority of Nigerians, we came here for education.
Oh, I see.
Really, if you meet a Nigerian, that's probably what they'll tell you.
Okay.
The opportunity to gain more education and expand ourselves in that way. We're not afraid to try out new things, so we do that. So yeah, that's how I ended up here. Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing a little bit about your journey and your story.
Thank you. And that's actually the same. If you really think about it, your ancestors probably came here for the same reason.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's not really it's not a tricky question or any question that should make anybody feel bad about it. It's just that people move around in life. Yeah. For different reasons. Yep.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the things that I'm curious to hear more about is, so here you are. You said since '96, so that's a good chunk of time that you've lived here in the United States. Mm-hmm. How might your experience as an African living in America differ from an African American's experience? And of course, we're talking pretty broad here, but I'm just kind of interested to hear your perspective on that.
Well, there are different differences, several differences, and similarities actually. Regardless, even them be far removed from that original culture, there are still parts of it that you see among African Americans. But one of the major one really would be I came here voluntarily. I came here on my own. I came here because I wanted to come here. For our African American brothers and sisters, knowing the history, they did not come here on their own. They were forced to be here. They were forcefully removed from everything they knew, and coming here and all the experiences, the oppression and the subjugation and the racism and all the horror things they went through, their ancestors went through. So just for that, psychologically, I see things differently. Coming from that place, because I don't have any negative attachment to white people as they would. So there are things that would trigger them that would not trigger me because of that. But when you look at their history and also understanding where they're coming from, what they have endured, what they have overcome,
right,
and continue to overcome. That's that one reason that I came here on my own, and I can choose to leave anytime.
Right.
Makes a big difference. So for them, psychologically, they have more to deal with. All the negative things that they've been through, their ancestors have been through. Not that we don't have our own issues in Africa, which is actually the same, whether slavery happened or being colonized in your own hometown, your own home nation, there are still those negativities, but it's a different way to look at it, because I grew up in an environment where all the lawyers or the doctors or the teachers or the nurses were black. So my color was not a problem. I never saw my color as anything but color. It's not a mark of inferiority. So I don't see someone that is not my color as superior in any way, form, or shape. Like, it means nothing to me. The color really does not have anything, any negative attachment to my mind or to.
I see.
Right.
So would you say that I want to make sure I'm hearing this right. So that's because for you, in your experience, that was the normative experience growing up in Nigeria.
Right.
Where it was predominantly Nigerians.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Everyone you met. Nobody, you didn't have to go through anything bad because of your color.
Right.
You were not, no prejudice because of your color. You were not exempted from participating in anything because of your color,
right,
or going to any school because of your color, or living in any neighborhood because of your color. So I am free to become anything that I want to become mentally. I don't have anything mentally that would tell me you cannot become this or go this place or live here because of your color. I don't have that.
Right.
And I didn't understand that when I first came here. I thought I could speak for them. I thought we were, okay, the same shade of skin, so must be the same experience. Until I went in depth into cultural competency in my graduate degree, where it unfolded in front of me, and I just was blown away, and I just could not believe that I thought I could speak for them. And that was such ignorance and to some extent arrogance on my side without knowing, not intentional.
Well, yeah, sure.
Right.
Sure. And so the assumption was because you were the same or similar shade of skin, that meant therefore,
the same experience.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. So I'm curious if you're comfortable sharing how might you have experienced being someone who is from Africa with a darker shade of skin, how might you have tasted just a bit of racism here in the United States? And perhaps you haven't. Perhaps that's just not part of your own experience living here in the United States. So you're saying you did not experience that in Nigeria because to be Nigerian was the normative experience there. But have you seen that? Have you experienced any of that in the United States?
Oh, absolutely, multiple times. But then at the same time, it doesn't go as deep as it would if it happens to an African American. I remember one time as at the hospital. As a matter of fact, let me. Prior to that, we wanted to buy a house in Red Lion.
Oh, okay.
So we called. Right, they're like, "Come see the house."
Okay.
So we went. And they looked at us, they're like, "Oh, we don't sell to people like you." And I'm like, now this was 99, okay? 99.
So this was you were still pretty new here.
Yeah.
Okay.
99, I lived in Philly for a couple of years. 99, we moved to York.
I see. Okay.
And I was like, what does that even mean?
So you literally didn't know what,
I'm like, what was going on? What? I'm like, my accent wasn't American. You didn't.
Yeah,
no.
right.
So anyhow, but I took it like, moved on, and we got a house at a different place.
Sure.
I had a patient that just used the N-word at me, and I did not understand what it meant. People around me had a reactions like,
yeah,
and
right?
I'm like, what just happened? Whatever she said was not good. Looking at your reaction, but it didn't mean anything. I went on to take care of this patient. They asked me, do you want to change your assignment, get an assignment? I'm like, no. I went on taking care of her. And then after that, she kept saying, you know what? I want her back. That broke that. And I kept taking care of her until she was discharged.
Oh, wow.
Because to me, it did not mean anything other than whatever she said, it's not who I am. Why should I answer to that? Like, why should that change anything? But I think it's because there is no trauma attached to the name on my end. There is nothing. It fell off because it couldn't take a hold on me at that level. So even recently, at the hospital, if you're in a leadership position and they wanted to see a charge nurse or a supervisor, and they call me and I go in, and the patient will say, I didn't ask for you, I asked for the supervisor. And then I'm like, I am the supervisor, sir or ma'am. But it doesn't, I go on, how can I help you? Other people may say, are you okay with that? Of course, I'm not okay with that, but I'm okay.
Yeah.
I'm okay, but I'm not okay with that, knowing what I know now. So there are so many things that will trigger an African American because of intergenerational trauma that they have endured. That would not trigger me in any way, form, or shape.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is fascinating. So just forgive me in advance if I say something that's out of ignorance. So I have a lot to learn. But studying world Christianity at a master's level, and now to some extent at a doctorate level, and being able to interact with people in all different parts of the world, you've talked quite a bit so far about the idea. Now you just used the most recent phrase of intergenerational trauma. You've talked about our ancestors and those who've gone before us. So as I sit and I listen to that, kind of that perspective as a modern Westerner, not that this is a bad thing. I think it has negative effects, but not that it's a bad thing. But just growing up in the West, we don't have much of the concept, I think, at least in my own experience, of our ancestors, those who've gone before us. So even for you to say at the start of this conversation, hey, your grandparents, your ancestors immigrated here too. Yeah. Do I know anything about them? No, not past 2 generations. I don't know anything about them. So I'm bringing that up because I think it's interesting to receive your perspective, because we don't oftentimes have that rootedness in history like certain other people groups may have. And I'm thinking about those who I've had the privilege of knowing and interacting with from Africa. They have a much deeper lived understanding and experience of ancestors and the significance of the history that's passed down. And so I'm wondering if hearing this perspective, some people might think, well, okay, so Julie, that word didn't mean much to you. You unpacked why. Why would it mean anything to anyone? And now you're hitting the key. It's because it's intergenerational trauma, right? So words matter. So we as followers of Jesus, words especially matter for us because God created all things with words. Words, as the proverb says, words have the power of life or of death. And so there is tremendous baggage that comes with words, including what you're describing, even though you're able to say, look, my experience and history is different, so it doesn't hit me the same way. But I just think I wanted to camp out there. Thanks for indulging me on that tangent. I think that's important because as someone of a Caucasian background or European background, I understand the visceral response that you described to the word, but I don't have the baggage of the intergenerational trauma attached to that.
Yes, and another way to look at it is not just the trauma of African Americans. In studying this, I went in depth, really into it on my own after the cultural competence class, because I was just blown away. So many things that I found out, I'm like, oh my gosh, for me to be able to cancel anybody from a different culture, even from my own culture, I need to understand more. Even in a clinical environment, Pastor Joe, no doctor will touch you or treat you without asking your history.
Oh, of course.
And your family history.
Yeah.
Because we want to know where the issue is coming from and how to address it. You cannot ignore history and want to fix a problem that is rooted in history. So don't talk about it. It makes us uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. You are hindering the person's healing, you see.
Yeah, that's such an important point. And again, I think I said this actually in our first episode in this series of this month. But from my perspective, it's, let's not talk about that because it might make someone of a lighter hue uncomfortable. And from my own experience, this is obviously not everybody tuning in, but from my own experience, growing up in a predominantly white community and school, it was this idea that these things that we're talking about, they're of the past, right? So why do we need to keep talking about them? I mean, this is stuff in the past. This doesn't happen today.
Right.
People don't experience this today. And if they experience it today, like, they should probably just go revisit the laws that overturn these
Well,
things.
let me answer that. Do you mind if I answer
Please
that?
do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we hear that a lot, and that comes from people that actually are not affected by the issue. Usually.
Yeah, right.
But the thing of it is that you and I inherited, let's say you and I inherited a house with a defective foundation.
Yeah, it wouldn't be good.
Okay. But we inherited it.
Yeah.
The people that built the house have been long gone.
Yeah.
All right, but we inherited it, and both of us live in this house now. So we can't just ignore the defective foundation and say, we did not build the house. It wasn't our fault. We weren't here when it happened.
Yeah, right.
But
Why
we're
would
still
we be
living in the
responsible
house,
for that?
right?
Yeah.
So both of us will have to come together to fix this house, this foundation, so the house will be able to shelter us and be a benefit to us. Even though we did not build the house, we were not here when it was built.
Right.
But we know it is defective and both of us live in it. So fighting you or you fighting me would not fix this foundation.
Oh, no.
We just gotta be honest enough to maybe uproot some things and take out some things and add some other things. But just saying, oh, it happened years ago, therefore, why should it matter to me? But at the same time, that in studying this, that's how I came about, and I came across epigenetics.
Yeah.
Epigenetics is the transference, it's a multi-generational transference of trauma from one generation to the other. And so you have these maladaptive coping behaviors that people have to adopt to be able to get past certain issues.
Exactly.
But then eventually gets transferred genetically to their offspring.
Yeah, right. And that's important because epigenetics isn't just talking about behavioral patterns passed down. It's talking about that and the fact that at a genetic coding level, it actually transfers.
Right.
Yeah. So it's both nurture and nature.
That's right. And so there is there's a research research studies on mice that were presented with a particular smell, and at that moment they were shocked as they were being exposed to this smell, whether mint or whatever.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. So and then at some point they did not have to shock the mice. They just exposed them to the smell, and they had the same stressful response as though they were shocked. But it didn't even end there.
No.
Their babies that were never directly exposed to this smell had an aversion to the very smell, and their grandbabies.
Yep.
ended up with an aversion to the same smell, even though they were never directly exposed to it.
Exactly.
But it's not even to the person being traumatized. The person that actually did the traumatizing.
Yeah.
At some point, when you see somebody being lynched, being hung, being killed, you have lost your sense of humanity at that moment. They could not feel the pain of the person.
No, there's no empathy.
Right, and that also was transferred on the other side to those generations that today, even if we're talking about it, people don't want to hear it. They don't feel the pain of the other person.
No.
So the same way trauma is transferred on their side. So it's not like our white brothers and sisters are free from trauma, because they also inherited that level of not being empathic, lack of empathy was also transferred. You have to be intentional in saying, I want to be different, I want to learn, and I want to be able to connect with people's pain. You can follow Jesus and not feel other people's pain. You know what I mean? And I know this is uncomfortable. I know it. I know it's an uncomfortable conversation, but it's a necessary conversation to have.
Absolutely.
So the same way African Americans or Africa, in general, Africans, it doesn't matter. Globally, we have, people for some reason just have problem with our color or who we are. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm sure there is more to it. So the same way the trauma is being transferred is the same way the lack of empathy is being transferred on the other side. That we continue the same thing without even knowing it.
Yeah. It's so fascinating because in Jamar Tisby's book, The Color of Compromise, he actually talks about how it's so sad. He talks about how in America, self-identified evangelicals, it's in the 90s percentage-wise, believe that the gospel, the good news of Jesus, is the answer to racial issues in our day. But then when you break it down, those self-identified evangelicals, and you break it down on lines of ethnicity, what you find is that those who are white, they believe that while the gospel has the answers, that they're actually on the receiving end of reverse racism. And so there's not only this, it's uncomfortable because it is, but sometimes there is a, back to your crack in the foundation analogy, there's an actual willful, maybe sometimes not willful, this depends on the person, I don't want to broad brush, but there's an ignorance of the crack in the foundation in the first place. Or maybe for some people, the crack was there 400 years ago, but there was good caulking used to fix that, and it's no longer a problem. And so we just, not only do we not have empathy in that, but you actually invalidate the experience of someone else. And so in that process, I think the root of it is then we're not actually loving neighbor, which means we're not actually loving God. How can we bear one another's burdens if we're not willing to even enter into empathy to try to understand someone else's story? So I can't put myself in your shoes. I'm not you, just like you can't do that for me, you're not me. But through connection and shared lived experience, sharing of stories, that's the starting point, I think, for entering into someone else's shoes as much as we can. And then leading that to cause us to change, cause us to want to find positive gospel-centered solutions to the challenges, but ignoring it or remaining, minimizing it because we're uncomfortable or wanting to hang, oh goodness, there's just so many things that we hang this issue on that allow us to circumvent it and allow us to continue to ignore it, and it's really, it's more than unfortunate.
It is unfortunate because, like you said, the message of Jesus is supposed to be the hope. And if we do actually follow it, the problem is that we're not following it. At the same time, we gotta come to a place where after we have preached and after we have prayed, there is an African proverb that said, after you have prayed, move your feet. In other words, it's not just going to end in talking about it, but we have to be intentional in actually building these bridges and being willing to cross the bridge to the other side. So in all of that, we have come to a place now where we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to feel the pain. We want to pretend that everything is okay. How can things be okay? If you have a people group that endured operation and subjugation for 300 years, okay? Now we're talking about 300 years. If you watch somebody kill a dog in front of you inhumanely, you need therapy. Many people need therapy to get past that. But many of us, we watch people being killed and we are not even touched by it.
No.
And so in studying this and looking at pictures of people from that time as they watch people being killed, being hung, and you see their face, some of them with grimace, like as if that's not a human being, because there has to be a cognitive dissonance for you to be able to make that all right within you. You have to name the other person inhuman, loose, criminal, violent. You gotta make them be the person that would deserve the action that you are about to impose on them, just so you can sleep at night. Because we're not designed to live with cognitive dissonance, you see. We're not designed to have a different value and not live it out. So in order for us to sleep at night, either we pretend that what we did not just happen, we didn't just do it, or we give ourselves reason why we did it. That will help us to sleep at night.
Reworking our own narrative to make sure that it fits the values that we have.
Right. And how can somebody that says, I am civilized, I am a follower of Jesus, be able to live with themselves and engage in such barbaric action and behavior over the years? And you can tell me that you are not somewhere. Either you are no longer a human, you have actually taken yourself away and become an animal yourself to the point where you cannot even feel the pain of the other. Even many people would many times, like killing an animal. Some people, animals will be killed or put down much more humanely than majority of African Americans and how they have been mistreated. So we can no longer, this is not the time. The younger generation will not put up with this. The older population, you may do this or hide behind the pews and the pulpit, but the younger generation, thank God for the younger generation that are willing to have these conversations now, because the church would not be sustained over time if we're not willing to come outside, out of our closets of comfort, whatever we call it, and have this kind of conversations. If we claim that we are one people, that we are one race, that we're created by God, that, Christ died for all of us, that in him there are no Jews or Gentiles, and no males or females, no masters, no slaves, and then we don't want to talk about it. Like, what are you talking about? So you said something else, but your actions, there has to be a time where actually we have evidence supporting what we say we believe. And I mean actual practical evidence that would meaning the way we live our lives and the way we relate to one another. It has to be real or it's not. Like, we can't keep playing around and pretend calling brother Joe, brother Mike, brother Bob. But in reality, we are not brothers and sisters, and we don't treat one another as such.
There's so much of what you're saying. Thank you. And thank you for having the courage to share what you're sharing. It's necessary. It's absolutely necessary. I think as I hear it, there's several things coming to my mind, but trying to keep it concise. So as I hear you share that, one might hear that and say, okay, Julie, but we don't do those things today. This is 2022. We're not doing those things that you described. Okay, so maybe you're making some good points about trauma being passed down generationally. I haven't thought about that before. I probably should think about that some more. But what does that still have to do with today? Because we don't do those things today. So with that kind of mindset in mind, what are some positive steps towards healing that we as American Christians, and maybe more specifically the American Evangelical Church, what are some steps that we can take towards racial reconciliation?
One would not say that it's not happening today and at the same time ask for reconciliation. I mean, obviously it's happening today for there to be a need for reconciliation. I mean, today we have black churches and white churches. Like, what are we talking about? You know, like we have black neighborhoods and white neighborhoods. What are we talking about? You know, well, there are so many things that are still happening. Oh, what are we talking? If we think it's not happening today, maybe that's the problem. Maybe we're blind to it. Maybe not to the extent. I may not see somebody wearing a white hood come in and burn my house, and they may be wearing suits today or uniforms in a different form of the same thing. So it is happening. Who are we asking? Who is giving us this answer saying it's not happening? It's coming from you. You may need to ask that question to people that are actually being affected and let them be the ones to tell you that it is still happening. Because if not, it's still you controlling the narrative.
That's really good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because the people that want to brush this under the carpet are not the people that are negatively impacted. That I can tell you.
Yeah, and you're speaking not just out of your own personal experience. I mean, I sense you're speaking because of your vocational role as a counselor and also working in the hospital, not just at the family health center. I imagine that you serve a broad population of people. Yeah, so you're able to share more than just your own perspective. You're able to share many, many other people's experiences.
Absolutely.
Albeit indirectly, of course.
And that is true. I see a lot of people, and I want to be in a place where I am not narrow-minded, that I'm not able to help them. Because if I don't come out of my comfort zone and actually meet them halfway at least, I will be of no help to them. So what I do, I don't do things or read studies or do research just to make myself feel comfortable. I want to know the root cause of the problem. Why are we having much more larger population of African American men in prison? Have you ever thought about why the violence level is in black communities? Black on black crime. We know hurt people. Who hurt them in the beginning? Where did that start? And when somebody does not have a sense of self or and feels hopeless, of course they turn into violence. Of course they turn into self-destructive behaviors. I mean, if you've been traumatized and you end up with just study PTSD, not even PTSS. PTSS is what we have found out. What it is called PTSS, post-traumatic slave syndrome. Okay, and then you have PTSD. They are similar, but it's not a disorder. Because I don't want people to be you don't want to pathologize people because of their trauma. You want to be able to understand their trauma and help them out. So post-traumatic slave syndrome, look it up. If you're out there, just look it up. It's this multi-generational propensity to violence, to addiction, to instability. All of these things, they're not like bad people are not like black people are not bad people. They are hurt people. And when you hurt somebody over and over and over again in an environment where they are not accepted as human beings, where they are seen as subhuman and they're treated as such, and then they act out. It's you hurting you fracture my foot, and then you complain that I'm limping. Like no. So we there are so many things to look at there. So to say that it's not happening, how do we move forward in reconciliation? We must admit that there is a problem. That there is there is a need for reconciliation. So what are we reconciling? What is that? The message of Jesus is about he has reconciled us and given us the ministry of reconciliation.
Yeah.
We say these things. The word reconciliation, the root word of that is to consolidate, to make one. So in Christ, we are one. He brings us together. There are no Jews, no Gentiles. We are one. But in order for you to reconcile something, you are saying there is a dismembership that happened,
Correct. Yeah.
So we must at least admit that we are not reconciled. And then in the process, how can we come together? And it's love. Love has to be the foundation. It has to be love because love, it's a decision. Jesus gives us a new commandment to love God and love one another. He reduces the 10 commandments to just one. And that one has 2 parts.
Right.
And it has to be love. Love is kind. Love does not seek its own. Love is patient. Love is gentle. If we actually go with love, that will be the solution. That will be a solution, because I'm not coming to you to point fingers and to blame you. I'm coming to hear what you have to say and then what I have to say, and together we work out something beautiful that will be better than what you could come up with on your own and what I could come up with on my own.
To work through the pain rather than to pretend like the pain is not there or try to invalidate it.
Yep.
Yeah. This is so good, Julie. And I appreciate the way that you frame that, obviously from a biblical perspective, because one of the things that I find concerning as a pastor, as a believer, as a young dad in this country, is that some people, when they might hear, oh, you're having conversations about this subject, they're uncomfortable. I can relate to that. Okay, they're uncomfortable, but
why?
I know.
No, I'm asking.
Oh, I know.
No, seriously, why?
Yeah.
I mean, we're not comfortable. We are not uncomfortable talking about Holocaust.
Right.
Why is this a problem? I want to know.
But I feel
why
like
is it?
I feel like that is there in part, not in whole, but in part because of what you talked about with epigenetics and trauma. The shame around it, the pain around it, the trauma around it.
On both sides.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And so one of the things that really deeply concerns me is that people could hear a conversation like this and think that, oh, they're just of a certain political framework, and therefore I shouldn't listen to it. And so I just see so many people get very easily offended about this topic and want to ignore it because if they can hang it on, you're being too political or you're being of a certain political bentedness. I can just put my fingers in my ears and ignore this. When it's frustrating at times because Scripture has so much to say. Now, of course, you're not going to find black and white Scripture on 2022, the United States of America, on this particular issue, but broad principles, and we've touched on many in this conversation. And so my point is, if 90+% of Christians in America believe that the good news of Jesus is the answer to this issue, which I would agree, then why on earth are we so adverse to talking about it?
Well, you know
let
what?
alone doing anything.
Well, because what we know today as Christianity, specifically Western Christianity, sad to say, is very far divorced from what the original message was supposed to be about. And I don't want to really take away from what we're talking about. But if the message of Jesus does not change us and transform us, I mean, from the root, from inside, we're wasting our time. The message of love and compassion, empathy, the message of the Good Samaritan, the message of the woman at the well, the message of Jesus inviting himself to have dinner at the tax collector's house. He just invites himself.
I was just thinking about Zacchaeus.
Yeah.
Right? Because he's so transformed in his interaction with Jesus, he goes back to the Torah.
Right.
And he says, I'm going to repay people 4 times what I stole from them.
Right.
And Jesus says, look at this man's faith.
Yep. He didn't even have to preach to him.
Yeah, so he's not just ascending verbally to a doctrinal statement, Zacchaeus. He's actually showing through his actions that his heart has been transformed by Jesus.
Right. Right. So the message of Jesus is transformative. I mean, if you're not changed by it, the person that tells you love your enemies, I mean, it has to take a whole different level of transformation from you to go from somebody that want to kill your enemy to loving your enemy. That's not an overnight. That's not intellectual change.
No, that's hard work.
So, the message of Jesus is a message that turns the world upside down in a way, even though it's supposed to be right side up. But it's not a message for you to defend your position. It's not a message of creating empires. It's not a message of political affiliation. If you are still campaigning one or the other, you're not following Jesus, because the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. And if you're following him, you have no place to lay your head. If you're laying your head in a Republican Party, or you're a Democrat or Protestant, or you are Pentecostal or Methodist or Lutheran, if you're camping in any of these camps and taking a foundation, you're not following Jesus. That I can tell you, because the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. He doesn't just take a camp and just camp in one place and then, shun the rest.
Thank God he doesn't.
Yeah, and we have really come far away from the message of Jesus. My fear is that what we have and what we have been preaching as the message of Jesus is not the message of Jesus. Many times is the message of Constantine more than the message of Jesus. Is the message of empires and power and privilege and prestige and all of these things. The message of Jesus reaches down. It doesn't go up. The higher you know Jesus, the lower you go in serving people, in connecting with people. It's not where you are on your throne and then you gotta tell everybody what to do. So, have we screwed up his message? Yes, we have. Have we hijacked it for our own selfish reasons? Yes, we have. And that's why we are not making a difference. And that's why you can be a Christian and still be hateful. That's why the slave masters were Christians and still remain slave masters and still killed. It's no different today. We may not have that at the same form, but it's still the same heart though. And we need to allow ourselves to be touched by the Lord. We really do. If not, there is no hope. We can play games all we want, but it's not gonna go anywhere. I'm sorry.
Thank you for your honesty. Well, I have 1,000 more questions, but I see that we're short on time.
I know.
I'm grateful for you. Thank you.
Thank you
for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Yeah. Any final closing word or word of encouragement that you might want to share?
Yes, and I know this is hard, but the heart of it is love and reconciliation, not division, not to create more, subgroups of who is for who, but to become one body of Christ. And I just pray. I pray that as we hear and as we walk this out, that we open our hearts to the Lord as to what he needs to shift in us. So we'll be able to see one another as brothers and sisters. If we're not able to do this, and if the church does not get this, there is no hope for the world. And therefore, we need to get this. We need to get it real fast and real quick, where we become one. And also for Black History Month, African American history does not start as there were people before they were made slaves. They must go back to find their history and to know the kind of people they were before they became slaves. We cannot start the message of Jesus going back to Genesis chapter 3, the fall. We must go to 1 and 2, and that's why his message is called Good News, right? So I think we've done that with actually the African American history, where we start with slavery. So it puts them in a corner where, okay, this is where I start, then where do I go from here? No, you were a people before you became slaves. And you need to find that. If you don't find that, it will be hard for you to actually find yourself and have a sense of self and have your own identity outside of slavery. So then in that way we can heal together. But I want to thank Genesis for their boldness and their courage to take on something like this. I know it's not easy and not everybody will support it or like it. But at the same time, it's necessary, and I truly want to say thank you, Pastor Joe, and the leadership of Genesis for taking this chance. It's a chance that you're taking, and I admire that a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. We'll look forward to seeing you next week as we continue this series on Black History Month. Have a great evening.